Well, like Whitney said, I am Holli Burgon. I own Burgon Consulting and Coaching, which is a firm that does kind of three buckets. I work with companies to figure out their people issues. So things like if your mentorship program isn't working, I'll come in and analyze what is working and what's not, and then create models of what works, and then design and present training around that to make it work in your company. Then I do kind of two coaching buckets. The first bucket is working with experienced professionals to see where they are now and how they can move to the next phase. And then the last bucket is job search. So people that are looking to transition to something new or start from scratch. So I've coached people who are applying to college and applying to graduate school, and how do you make those transitions from education to career. Like Whitney said, I have a PhD. I did a master's degree in instructional psychology and technology, which is instructional design. So it's how do we design training? And then my other emphasis was evaluation. So how do we evaluate learning and performance? And then I did my PhD in the same kinds of things with an emphasis on careers. So I did my dissertation on the career success strategies of female innovators. And since then, I did a postdoc at the University of Illinois. A postdoc is basically a university position that isn't faculty. So I stayed and I taught courses in leadership, career theory, emotional intelligence, and I also did research on creativity and innovation, specifically how do we help scientists and engineers become more creative and innovative. And since that time, I've been running my own firm. I really enjoy it. There are ups and downs of being self-employed, which we will talk about a little bit. But my field, my area, my discipline is human resources. So things like career development, coaching, consulting can fall under a particular branch of human resources, which we will talk about, sort of the learning and development side. And today I just want to talk to you. You guys are exploring, you're learning from all sorts of different business leaders, and I just want to help you think about what your career might look like if you go into human resources. What is human resources, and what are the roles that you can fill? What are the tasks that you can perform? What are the good times that you can have? So my presentation today is called Becoming an HR Rockstar. And then, so some things we're going to talk about, just what is HR? What do those careers look like? So I have a few volunteers who are going to help us read some of descriptions of what people's jobs look like in HR every day. And then how you can rock as an HR pro. So what are the things, what are the skills, the talents, the dispositions that you can develop that will help you become awesome in HR, okay? Go ahead. All right, so human resources management is kind of the technical big bucket term for HR. And it's basically anything, all the systems that encompass how we manage, train, develop, pay people who are in organizations. So it's basically the structures that are in place that shape how people operate in a company. Go ahead. Okay, so I want to get into HR is a very broad field. There is lots to be done. So I want to talk specifically about some of the kind of categories and some of the more narrow tasks that HR people accomplish. So the first, if you go back, strategy. So somebody has an organization. They get a great business idea. They decide, hey, I'm going to run with this. They get a license, they get education, whatever they need to set up their business. And surprise, they're good at it. And they want to grow. That means bringing more people on board usually. So when they hire people, they may have the skills to start the business and have the business idea and make it run, but they don't necessarily have the skills or a plan in place for managing other employees. That's where HR starts. You have to start with a strategy for managing people. So that starts with some organizational development and structure. What is your plan? What does it look like? How are you going to grow people in your organization? And also defining the work. What are they going to do? What does that look like? How are you going to distinguish jobs? The next is policy and legal. HR is, there are so many beautiful, wonderful laws to protect employees. It is HR's job to make sure that those laws are enforced by the company. If not, you're gonna get sued, okay? You're gonna lose your job, the company's gonna get sued, you're gonna get sued. That being said, it's also just good to be ethical and kind to people. And there are policies in place that can help ensure that everybody's on the same page about what that looks like and how to accomplish that. So that's where some of the policy and legal comes in. Also, there's sort of these under policy and legal, I'm gonna call them, they are management tasks, but they're kind of the nuts and bolts of HR. What are the basic things that you have to accomplish in HR? The first is recruitment and selection. How are you gonna find people to hire? Recruitment is actually really fun. I have a colleague at a major university in New York who does all their recruiting for a particular college. And she's traveling, she went to Europe recently, she travels all over the country, and she just talks to students and says, hey, come to our school. So she's talking to high school students, she's talking to college students who are maybe interested in graduate school. I have another friend who was a recruiter at a bank, and her job, she like combed LinkedIn for people that might have skills that she was looking for. She networked massively, so she was always throwing parties and networking events. And she also did a lot of traveling, and she was so good at her job that she got recruited herself by another company to come do it for them. So recruiting, how do you find those people? And then selection, which is all the interviewing and the hiring processes. And this can be a really tricky part. This is where you want to make sure that you're following the legal, because there are really tricky questions that you cannot ask in the hiring process. And there are really tricky attitudes and behaviors that can make hiring a little bit sticky and can get you in trouble really fast. So if you're in the hiring and recruiting process, you've got to check your people biases at the door. And you've got to make sure that you just crazy love people and that you're really excited about finding out what makes them tick and how they can be great in your company. Next is payroll and benefits, which is pretty obvious. What are you paying people? And what insurance packages and retirement packages and parking passes are you giving them? Employee relations is where people go to complain, which sounds terrible, but if your boss is harassing you, you really need somebody to talk to. That person is employee relations in HR. Retention, promotion, succession, which is, do you have a plan for when your boss retires, do you have somebody trained that's gonna step into his spot? And also, are you getting good people, talented people, moving up in the organization as leaders? And the second is exit. And it's a really hard thing, but sometimes you do have to fire people. So not a fun part of the job, but you also get to retire people and celebrate them and send them on a happy way. So that's part of exit. Next. Analytics. If you are a math nerd, if you love data, if you love statistics, if you love computers, if terms like big data get you really excited, analytics might be the place for you. And analytics is exploding in the HR field. There is now a master's program specifically for analytics at the University of Utah. And they are one of the first, but they won't be the only. And it's a huge, like I said, it's growing hugely. There's massive interest. And there's massive interest at really big companies that have a lot of people. So it's really great organizations like Google, Apple, Goldman Sachs, US Bank. So there's a lot to be done about tracking people and tracking the numbers about people in companies. And then my favorite bucket where I fit is training and development. So once they're hired, how do you onboard them? How do you train them to be in the company? Compliance, which I know it sounds funny, but there's legal training that people have to take every year to stay legal. So for example, here at a public university or a public school, every employee every year has to take ethics training. And they usually do it online, but that's something that HR has to manage. Go back. Anything skill building, so if you want your companies to grow and develop, team building activities, leadership and development, programs for top talent. So if you have people who are really have big potential and that you're really excited about developing, there are programs that you can develop specifically for those people, and individual coaching. So if there's a manager that could be great but isn't great yet, or is great and could be even better, That's where that kind of happens. Okay. And then employee experience. And this can be a really fun bucket. So this is like all the lifestyle stuff that happens. How do you help your employees just be happy and enjoy their experience in the company? So another growing area is wellness. So these are things like, do any of you have companies where they like have incentives for working out and walking? Yeah? What is your company's program like? Okay, very cool. So did you guys hear that? Stress management, they have spa allowances and financial incentives for wellness. And then I saw a hand back there. Okay, that's awesome. So also financial incentives for weight loss. I have a colleague that works for a major computer company, and they get t-shirts. And it's not cash in the bank, but everybody that does the program and like wins the t-shirt is so proud to wear it. They get really, really excited. So sometimes those incentives can be really small, but even if you want to work for a company that has a gym, that gym is sort of managed by where does it go? It goes in the wellness bucket. So diversity and inclusion. So how do you make your company rich with people who have lots of different backgrounds and bring lots of new and engaging ideas? Affinity groups kind of is related to that. So for example, if you want to start an LGBT group of My Little Pony fans in your company, that's an affinity group. If you want to start a book lovers group, that would fall into an affinity group. So it can be lots of sort of grassroots employee-driven affinity groups, but also the organization will usually host groups. They will start groups themselves around gender, around ethnic background, around alumni groups sometimes. If there's a core group of alumni from a particular university, they might have an affinity group for that. And a lot of activities happen in those groups, but also a lot of mentorship and networking happen in those groups. Special programs, so I have a colleague that started a TED Talks style program at her company, and they have people audition to give TED Talks in the company. They audition with a speech, they practice for 2 months with somebody, with a team in HR, and then they give those TED Talks to people in the company, and everybody loves it. The rest of the company feels really enriched. The people that are involved get really excited, and it's something really fun for them. Or community outreach. So I have a colleague who works at a major bank, and they do things like charity runs every year. They do hikes. They do golf games. So anything that gets them out into the community. One of the fun things I love is they work with, they take teams of people and they go out and they do business education in elementary schools in the inner city. And they love it. It's just tons of fun. And so those are the sorts of programs that you can design and develop and run as an HR leader. Okay, so now I talk super fast. If you need me to slow down, just like do this. Okay, so I want you to get a sense of kind of the day-to-day, what does it look like in the field if you have a particular job. So I have little scenarios. These are all based on colleagues that I've worked with. So it's like a movie, you know, it's based on real life, but fictionalized to protect the innocent. So I have 3 volunteers. Can I have the first person, the coordinator in a large corporation one? And I've put names here just as place fillers, but your classmates have volunteered and they can use their own names or a name of their own invention. Who has the large corporation one? Can we start there? Thanks.
My name is Austin. I work as a recruitment coordinator at a large high-tech development corporation. My typical day includes handling flight plans, hotels, and other logistics for recruiters' campus visits, scheduling interviews with job candidates and answering their questions by phone, and setting up conference rooms and computers for in-house job fairs.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, can I have the medium-sized?
Hi, my name's Erica. I'm a training manager at a mid-sized financial services company. I'm half finished with a year-long high-potential development program that I designed. The program participants attend quarterly team building retreats, get C-suite FaceTime, and have a bi-weekly group networking event. I conducted evaluations that suggest participants are enjoying the program and that their managers see improvement in their performance.
Thank you very much. Okay, and the small company? Yeah, just start right there, thanks.
I'm Yao, and I'm the HR manager at a small aeronautics design firm. I oversee all HR function from hiring to retirement benefits. A significant chunk of my week is spent tracking hours and calculating performance, incentive pay for the part-time programmers who comprise more than half of the company's workforce. Luckily, I can hire outside vendors to handle training, and I have developed a knack for negotiating the contracts quickly.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the roles that you fill, all those buckets that I talked about, it depends on the size of the company usually, which of those jobs you will have to fulfill. If you are in a large company that has 35,000 people that are spread across the globe, chances are you're only going to have to do one of those things because they have so much to be done that they can fill entire departments full of people who do just one of those things. So they have just analytics, or they have just policy, or they have just training and development. If you work at a smaller organization, chances are you are going to have to do all of those things. So if your company only has 30 people, they don't have enough staff to manage or fill an entire HR department. And frankly, there probably isn't a need. So a lot of times, the entry-level positions and the early career positions that you're going to do in a company like that involve what we call HRP, which is HR partners. And there's various terms for that and various acronyms, but it's HRBP is probably the most common. So an HR business partner, which means if you're in a medium to large size firm, you're going to be assigned to probably a handful of managers or a department, something like that. You're going to be their go-to HR person. So if they need to hire somebody, they're going to come to you. If they need to fire somebody, they're going to come to you. If they're worried about somebody's health, they're going to come to you. So you're the go-to. They're going to come to you. And so the HRBP ends up being somebody who does a lot of different HR tasks because they're the go-to for a whole bunch of different managers. Okay? And in a company where you're basically going to be your own HR department, you're still doing all those same kinds of things, but you're working you're working with managers and you're working directly with employees usually. Okay? So there's a lot of opportunity for one-on-one engagement. If you like working with groups, there's a lot of opportunity for that through training and development. Okay, I want to open it up for questions because I see you guys you have these faces So I would love to sort of address some of the questions you have about any of those particular buckets or starting out in HR generally. And so he asked, if you're in a large corporation, do you ever work one-on-one with people? Are you ever engaging with people? Or are you a little bit far removed versus a small company? And the answer is it depends in a large company on where you're sitting. So if you are sitting in analytics, you're probably not going to talk to a lot of people. You're going to get a lot of data flowing to you they have what's called human resources management programs that are sort of like the online tools. Do you guys use Blackboard here? What? Canvas, okay. So it's like Canvas, except for instead of a classroom management tool, it's an HR management tool, but it works in a similar way. Like people log on for information, they log on to submit certain data, that sort of thing. If you're working in analytics, you're going to get all that data, but you're probably not going to be out talking to individual people. And then you're distributing. So then you're reporting, and again, if you're in analytics, you're going to be generating a lot of reports. So you're going to be analyzing that data and sharing that data and sharing your findings with the people who can use them to make a difference, to make changes, to reinforce certain things, to not reinforce certain things. If you're in training and development, chances are you're going to be engaging with a lot more people. And there are different training and development roles too. So there's a design side. So if you love web design and development, if you love learning, instructional design might be a great place for you. And if that's the case, you're going to be talking to what we call SMEs, so subject matter experts. So you're going to be talking to the managers and the people on the ground to figure out what their people need to know Then you're going to translate that to an online learning tool or to a course that you design, but then somebody else might deliver that course. So they might be the facilitator that presents it and actually teaches it to people. If you are in a smaller firm, chances are the instructional designer will also be the facilitator. You're going to do some combination of these things. And I don't want to overemphasize the division of labor in a large corporation. There's still a lot of overlap, and there's still a lot of ways that if you want to be working in something else, like if you want to be facilitating and designing, there are ways that you can make that happen. That was a really great question. So if you're a manager, how do you make sure that your recruiters are abiding by the same standard because that's an important job, right? Bringing somebody onto your team. Part of it is there are checks and balances. So there are policies in place to ensure that all the companies recruiting and all the companies hiring follows the same rules. That's number one. Number two is hiring managers almost always are involved in the selection process, which can be exciting and is really good for the hiring managers because they want somebody who's going to fit with their team and somebody they're going to want to work with. But it's also tricky for policy people and recruiting people because HR has the legal knowledge to do that right, whereas a hiring manager may not know the legalities and may ask a few tricky questions. Or let me give you an example. So there was an organization where a big recruiting process had happened. They'd spent several months. They'd narrowed it down to 2 candidates. The candidates were invited to be on site for an interview. They were there the whole day, meeting with different people and different teammates. They gave presentations. Those presentations were assessed and analyzed. They went to lunches, etc. One of the candidates was male and one of the candidates was female. They were both equally qualified. They were scientists, I will divulge. They were scientists and they both had killer resumes. They both looked really, really good. And at the end of the day, the male candidate was told, "We're really excited about your work. We think you're going to be a good fit." And the woman was told, "We're really excited to have a woman on staff." So that's sort of the thing. That probably wouldn't happen in a recruiting office. That happened with a hiring manager. And I see a lot of ouch faces. That's totally an ouch moment. If you have a killer resume and you are an awesome scientist, do you want to be told, thumbs up, you're a girl? No, you want to be part of the team. You want to be valued for your work. So the hiring manager has a say, but if you are a hiring manager who is also involved in the hiring process, work with your HR team and work with your recruiters to make sure that you know how to handle the process so that you land a really good candidate. I can tell you right now, the qualified female did not take the job. They lost out. And, I'm sure they got a really great candidate still, but if she was the best one and the one that they wanted, they still would have lost out. So it can be tricky, but there are multiple people involved in the hiring process to make sure those checks and balances, yeah.
Aren't there certain questions that you just can't ask? Like age,
Yes.
that sort of thing?
Yes, exactly. So some of the fun things that you might want to know about somebody that you cannot ask are, what's your age? Are you single? Do you have kids? You feel healthy these days? What are some of the other ones? Like home ownership, or where are you from? You can't ask. You cannot ask any questions about religion. And that brings up a really good point. We're going to talk about, so did you guys hear that? She asked about, can you ask somebody to remove piercings?
Or to cover up tattoos, or to
Yep.
dye their hair back to a normal color.
Yes. Anything that has to do with how you're showing up in the company, they can ask about. However, if you are in a wheelchair, they cannot ask you if you can walk. Okay? Not going to happen. But they can ask you questions related to, are you able to do this job with specific accommodations? So, do you guys know about accommodations for disability? Is that something you're familiar with? So as long as the company can do something that's reasonable that can help you do the job just fine, then you're equally qualified no matter what your challenges might be.
What would be an example of that?
So for example, Whitney and I both know somebody who's blind, who has an amazing job in the military. She's built an amazing career in the government and currently works for the military. She needs a Braille reader attached to her computer. The company is required to provide that for her. That's a really tricky question. If the company can make accommodations for that person that can help them do the job they need to do, then it's on the company. They can't fire. If they can reassign that person to a job that better fits them, that's also preferable. There are very few situations in which it would be acceptable to fire somebody based on a disability.
Yeah.
And also, the same is true for age. If you think somebody just doesn't walk slow enough and maybe they're pushing 70, you can't fire them. They're going to get to the meeting. It might be a couple of minutes late, but if they can do the job, keep them, love them, use that experience to your advantage. But they're going to turn around and slap you with an ageism suit, probably. Okay? So same thing with reasonable accommodations. So if you have somebody with a physical disability, and sometimes age causes physical disabilities, if you can make a reasonable accommodation for them, like can you schedule a meeting for 12:05 and have everybody show up at 12:05 instead of 12 o'clock, that might be pretty reasonable. Okay? Or I know this gets really sticky, and it's a really sensitive issue for a lot of people who face disabilities, and some disabilities are more obvious than others. But your company, if you have a disability or if you know somebody with a disability, companies are responsible for helping you be able to do the job you're qualified to do with reasonable accommodation. And here, because there are so many people that just have, again, we all have just like crazy backgrounds and different experiences and different capabilities and talents. You want tons of talent, tons of diversity to make sure you're getting the best. That's a really good question. So how do you incorporate diversity into the hiring process without being accused of bias? There are lots of laws and lots of policies in place at individual companies that try to protect for that. It is not, I wish I could say it's 100% and that everybody is just awesome and only looks at the candidate's qualifications. There's tons of research. For example, there was a study done. Have any of you read Freakonomics? Okay, so it's sort of a pop psychology book. They do all this crazy research and find all these things like kids who are born in November are better athletes. And that's because they're the oldest in their grades, they figured out. It's not because they have any more talent, it's because they're one of the older people on the team. And they just have a few more months under their belt to get better. So there's things like that. And one of the things they studied was who's more likely to get interviewed based on their name. And they found people that had ethnicity-specific names were less likely to be interviewed than generically white American names. So there's things like that, the biases that trickle in ways that are hard to account for, hard to track, hard to nip in the bud. But there are so many guides that can help you figure out what's working and what's not. For example, at universities, at public universities, there is affirmative action. So there are quotas that you have to meet. My advice to you is if you are in HR, don't rely on the quota. The quota is a minimum. Like if you don't see a difference in the people you're looking at, there's a problem, number one. But number two, you can't assume that if there is a difference, it means there's meaningful, that if you can see a difference, that there's meaningful difference. So try to look for a diversity of backgrounds, not just a diversity of faces, and do everything you can to dig deep to make sure that you know exactly what their qualifications are and exactly what they bring to the table. That is a brilliant transition. Let us talk about how you can prepare to be a rock star in HR. Okay, you're gonna skip the examples. I put the examples in here just so you have them later. Okay, so skill sets. These are things that I want you to have so that you can just be awesome in HR. The first is emotional intelligence. Are you aware of yourself? Are you aware of how you tick and how you operate? And can you manage yourself? So can you talk yourself down from a ledge if somebody pushes one of your triggers? If somebody does something that really pushes your buttons and makes you angry, do you lose it? Or can you rein that in and stay in the dialogue and stay in the conversation? So that's self-awareness and management. And the second is social awareness and communication. So do you have excellent verbal and written communication skills? Can you build and maintain positive, healthy relationships? If you have, they always say like HR is sort of for people. I think that's partially true, but I also think it's just for people who maybe, you can be an introvert and be really great at HR. You just have to have the willingness and ability to build positive relationships. You have to be aware of others. You have to respond to them appropriately. You have to engage them appropriately. The second is integrity. Because of all these rules and the stickiness that we were talking about, it is so important that you are honest and upright, that you walk the walk, that you practice what you preach in HR. Because if you claim to be all warm and fuzzy and let's love everyone and hire only the best talent and promote only the best people, and then you're making racist jokes in the back room, or if you're flirting with one of your employees that you manage, like, no. You have to be willing to be honest, upright, and you have to be how do I say this? I don't want to say a good person, because there's a huge range of what people consider good. But you have to be willing to have integrity. Simply put. Okay. The third I would say is organization. You don't have to be a born organizer, but you need to learn how to organize well. HR, there's lots of logistics, there's lots of competing deadlines, there's lots of competing projects. You have to be able to keep all of that on track. We've talked about hiring a lot, and I prefer to talk about something else. So for example, if you're writing like 10 reports based on analytics data from 7 different sources, you have to make sure the right data gets in the right report. And you have to make sure the right report gets to the right people. And you have to make sure that you're editing it in the right way when they ask for revisions. And then it goes back to the same people. So there's just a lot of stuff that you're always doing, which keeps HR exciting. There is always something to be done. If you are bored in HR, chances are you're slacking. I mean, there is no reason. There's always something cool to be done. For example, that colleague I talked about who designed the TED Talks for her company, that was just something she did on her own. She was a little bit, I wouldn't say she was bored, but she saw a need that she thought she could fill, and she designed something new. So there's always something to be done, but it always means that you're juggling a lot of different tasks and deadlines, so be organized. Along with that is flexibility and prioritization. Projects are always changing. People change their minds frequently. You have to be willing to adapt. And because HR is so big and broad and wide, sometimes they'll ask you to move from recruiting to payroll. And sometimes you'll get asked to do compliance training. So for example, at big banks, every year when the tax law changes, everybody in the company has to pass a test about the new laws. Tedious? Yes. You think those people want to do that? Not really. Not really. The tax law is not going to change that much, and they don't want to do a 12-hour training just to pass a little test that they already know a lot about. But you might be asked to make sure that they're taking that training. Even if you're like a training and development or person who would rather be doing design and would rather be facilitating large groups, instead you're tracking people doing compliance training. So be flexible. It's totally okay. Again, there's lots of room to do what you want to do. Be willing to change and do what needs to be done. Also technical. Do you have computer savvy? And that includes social networking skills. If you're a recruiter in particular, social networking is huge. And do you have knowledge of law, which we've talked about extensively. Next is, how do you get in? And I'm going to say go through the front door. Get a business degree, undergrad. Do an MBA. There's MPAs. There's Masters of Human Resources. There's Masters of Industrial Relations. There's Masters of Organizational Behavior. There's Masters of Industrial and Organizational Behavior and Industrial Psychology. So there are lots of different inroads in terms of majors, but do something traditional. You can go in through a side door. You can be a sociology major and get a really great job in HR, but you're just making the sales side of your employment, your own employment, a little bit harder. I went through sort of a side door. I did instructional design, but then I did a PhD, and a PhD is not a typical degree for somebody in HR. An MBA is more typical, or an MPA is more typical. Sometimes I have to do a sales job because they want to know, like, do you really want to be in industry? Not at a university? Like, why did you get a PhD? And so then I tell them a little bit about how it built my skills and how it brought me into industry and that sort of thing. It's more of a sales job than you need. And if you go through one of the traditional routes, chances are you are going to get those basics like you asked about. You are going to have the legal background, you're going to have like the software background, you're going to have the nuggets, the basic nuggets that you need to succeed. And then there are also certifications outside of degrees. So once you have your degree, you can get these. So SHRM is the Society for Human Resource Management. It's a very exciting organization. They have certifications for HR professionals, and same with the PHR. So there are other certificates you can get after that to make your resume more legit. More education gives you more skills. Next. Okay. What you can do today. What can you do right now? Control your brand. And Professor Wilkinson is brilliant at this because she's a marketing genius. So if you have questions about how to control your brand, she's your go-to. But make sure there are so many ways to put yourself out there in the world, and how you put yourself out there, even right now, even today, will affect your employment down the road. So we talked about how you show up. Can the company ask you to cover up your tattoos? They can. Can they ask you to remove piercings? They can. Can they prevent you from smoking at the workplace? They absolutely can. If your Instagram and your Facebook are all about how you're getting drunk and partying on weekends, if it shows you even smoking, HR is not going to want to hire you because they're not going to want to lose 15 minutes of work every 2 hours while you go out and have a smoke. Okay? I talked to an HR colleague this week who said, I checked out somebody's Instagram and all it was like Sports Illustrated quality bikini shots of her family vacation to the beach. And she said, she looked beautiful, but I have no idea what to do with her in my company. So companies have every right to ensure that you are showing up in a way that represents the company well. If you are not a person that's going to represent them well, they're not going to bring you in the door to begin with. Okay? So if you want to be a hireable professional, make sure your social media and make sure your personal brand shows up, not flawless, because none of us are, but make sure you're presenting yourself as a quality colleague. Yeah. It's a way to express your personal ideas and your personal experiences, but it's in a very public forum. And your company has every right to, for example, this is a great example. University admissions is like a hiring process. Harvard University recently rescinded admissions to multiple students because of crass memes they produced in a private Facebook space. So they were part of a private Facebook group. They produced and engaged with these really crude, I won't even repeat them, but you can read the New York Times article. It was fascinating. So because they were part of this group, Harvard had said yes. When Harvard got wind of the Facebook group, even though it was a private group, they rescinded. They said, sorry, we know it's May, and we know we've already said yes, but no, you can't come. Hiring works the same way. You represent the company. If you are not representing the company well, they have every right to give you the boot. Yeah. Well, like I said, this is private. So they...
How would they find that?
once it's out there, it's out there.
I want to just go on my Twitter.
They don't even have to look very hard. Anytime you put up a picture, even if a lot of times, even if it's on a private account, Google will snatch it and it will make it available. So if you don't want it to be known, if you don't want somebody to know you've done something, my advice is don't do it. Just don't. The second thing is, if you do it, oops, don't share it. Don't spread it around. Okay? Manage your brand. Part of your brand is get good grades. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it makes a difference. Because right now, your job, I know a lot of you are working outside of school, but one of your biggest part of your professional life right now is doing well in school and learning as much as you can. Grades are part of your brand. Develop and share your skills, so learn as much as you can. Do stuff with your talents. Get involved. Document what you learn and do. So social media can be a way to record that, but also you want to keep track of what you're learning and doing so that you can share that with employers down the road. So you can tell them, hey, I did this really great thing. And some of those things are going to go on a resume, but some of those things you can just talk about in interviews. Some of those experiences you're going to share with employees who are struggling, that you're trying to coach through hard times. You want to share their joy. Okay, and the other thing is find good mentors. Talk to as many people as you can, no matter what career you're interested in. If you are interested in HR, or when I was young, I really wanted to own an advertising agency. This was my dream until I was 17. And my dream changed when I realized that maybe to earn a living, I'd have to sell cigarettes to children, and I was not down with that. So dreams change, but talk to as many people as you can and learn about what they do. Learn about their day-to-day, and when you find somebody that you're really excited about, ask if they'd be willing to continue to meet with you on a regular basis. Learn as much as you can from them and use them as a mentor. And then anytime you can, because they're giving you help, offer help in return. Use your skills and your talents to help them do something they're trying to accomplish. Other questions? You guys are awesome. Thank you for letting me come.
Thank you, Holli.